Is everything all right? People talk or say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in their eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.
I believe you are quite aware the situation has changed since last we spoke.
The truth is still the truth, and a bargain is still a bargain.
And Mayor Cermak is now deceased.
Yes. What does that have to do with our contract?
I do not recall signing a contract with you, Mr. Eller.
We had a verbal agreement. I'm sure my uncle here will attest to that.
Nathan, please. You're being most rude.
But Dawes reacted just as I knew he would.
Lewis, as a family man, I quite understand your position. As for you, young Mr. Heller, you should not have spoken to the papers of this. It was a breach of confidence.
Nothing was said of our arrangement being a confidential one. Besides which, I was in fact discreet.
How so?
I didn't tell the reporters why I was offered the job at the fair. Void our deal, sir, and I'm going to be put into an embarrassing light. I will have to inform the press of your involvement.
This reeks of blackmail, young man.
It reeks of business. Our arrangement is binding in my view, and if you feel differently, I'll be noisy about it.
Nathan.
I'm not a big wheel like you, General, but us little wheels can get good and goddamn squeaky when we don't get our grease.
My secretary will have contracts ready for you to sign this afternoon at 4. Please return and sign them. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, the never-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm Robcasting at you, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is, of course, Robservations episode number 1032. I can't sell myself short like that, can I? I guess other people can. I do it all the time too. What am I saying? Well, at last, or we have come to it at last, the end of Andor, the end of the most satisfying Star Wars journey I've had since 1980. That was at least on screen. Yeah, what a satisfying yet bittersweet, sad conclusion. I was riveted. I was, well, like Thanos said, he was inevitable. The ending was inevitable. What a show! What the scenes! I could talk a lot about it, but before I get into it, I want to cover some old business old business, new business. I got some letters I want to address before I get into the Andor of it all. One of them, the first letter I want to read, is actually from a civics teacher, and it's about Captain America. Hello, Rob. I hope all is well. I consider myself to be an active viewer of the Robservations podcast, and I decided to write in a letter based on a topic that I've been thinking about lately. What's the stance of Captain America in our modern world? As a civics teacher, the concept of a character draped in the American flag who pushes against government agendas has always struck a chord with me. The message of standing for what you believe in and valuing American freedom, even when it feels like political leaders, both left and right, are slowly dismantling the core values of the nation, is also an ideology that I personally believe should be presented to more K through 12 students. And while I was always more of a Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Hulk fan growing up, I truly feel like Steve Rogers' live-action depiction personified this ideal perfectly. And it was a great metaphor that resonated with many people throughout the 2000s and the early MCU era. But what does Captain America stand for today, and how does it reflect the modern audience? As an African American and Stewart comic reader, I was floored to see Sam Wilson take up the mantle in 2015. I never actually considered they would pass down the shield in the films to Sam, but nonetheless, I was thrilled to see where they'd take the character mantle next. While I enjoyed Falcon and the Winter Soldier series as a retooled origin story for Sam, I do believe the show overall would have served greater narrative purpose if it was retooled as a film rather than show. Relegating Sam's version of Cap to the small screen made the character feel less important than Steve, even when his storyline delved into deep conversations regarding race and self-advocacy. With all of the drama behind the scenes of his first solo outing, I was a little trepidatious on how the rest of the world would feel about seeing a black man carry the shield, considering the film might be poorly received. That being said, I recently watched Brave New World, and while I did enjoy the overall film, I can definitely agree with others who found it lacking in storytelling and character development. Most of the creative choices in the film just felt bland and uninspired. There was nothing that really stuck with me after reflecting on it a few days later. In general, the score wasn't memorable, the tone of the movie was all over the place, and the dialogue choices were generic, probably because Disney knew some audience members didn't watch the Disney Plus series, so they felt like they had to catch everyone up with past events that were already detailed in the Falcon and Winter Soldier series. Hell, even Sam's new blue suit felt visually derivative of something Steve would wear on a stealth mission. But rather than focus on trying to fix the issues of a movie born from the Bob Chapek era of quantity over quality, I figured I would share some ideas on how the MCU can reinvent Cap for the future. Option 1. Change the genre. While I do appreciate the adaptive tone of Ed Brubaker's run, I do think it's time to move forward and change the tone of Sam's films. His film franchise needs to stand on its own and move away from the political thriller genre that engulfed the previous trilogy. If there's a mandate to keep Sam's Cap airborne, then I suggest going for a traditional all-American summer barbecue 90s action tone. Actually, that's a really good idea. Maybe something similar to Top Gun or even Independence Day. After all, Top Gun Maverick proved audiences still feel pumped about seeing American exceptionalism and perseverance narratives as long as the messaging isn't too preachy. In my opinion, the series could benefit from hiring a director with a Jerry Bruckheimer, Michael Bay-esque appreciation for celebrating our veterans, freedoms, and American pride. Consider the following: epic shots of fighter pilots, intense chase music, oversaturated shots of tattered American flags, and maybe even Cap leading his own battalion of veterans who step out of retirement for one last fight. I am down with every one of those things. This type of tone could provide a fresh take on the character as long as they don't lose sight of what Cap stands for. In an age where an audience is looking for escapism in the media, I feel like this direction could be what a modern audience needs, even if it diverts from the beloved political thrillers like Winter Soldier and Civil War. Option 2. In contrast to a high-flying adventure, I propose an alternative suggestion. Sam loses the wings. Though it could be controversial, it could help separate Sam from his previous identity as the Falcon. If memory serves correctly, I remember reading an old Stan Lee interview where he details the creation of Sam Wilson the Falcon. He mentioned Captain America, referring to Steve Rogers, should have a friend who can fly since he was mostly a ground-level character. If Sam is going to take over the mantle, and we're getting a new Falcon through Joaquin Torres, both monikers now feel like derivatives of each other. If Sam were forced to lose his wings, it could make the character feel more vulnerable while offering new avenues of challenges and character development. You could even tell the story of Sam losing the wings temporarily in a narrative similar to Tony Stark's capture. Maybe Sam gets shot out of the sky, or maybe he gets captured by villains and has to creatively fight his way out with nothing but the shield on his back. It would definitely mean something we've never seen Sam deal with before, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't be interesting. Option 3. Make Captain America stand for something new. Sam definitely has a voice in the MCU, but lately his speeches have felt a bit hollow. While I appreciate him detailing aspects of the Black experience, I want to see his views and actions represent a new generation of citizens. There was a great idea in one of the comics where Sam created a Captain America hotline. This allowed him to visit a variety of states throughout the nation and approach different problems with unique situations. This would be a really fun storyline to bring into live action, considering he's just one man who'd have to juggle hurricane relief efforts, volunteering in local communities, and even stopping political acts of domestic terrorism. All in all, the hotline would offer unlimited potential for storytelling and would allow Sam to establish his own voice as he tries to promote a sense of unity while still respecting the small differences of American idealism that exists throughout the various states. You could even throw a monkey wrench into the story by asking the question, what happens when the hotline system gets hijacked or manipulated by non-friendly forces? Option 4. Finally, the last idea I have would involve more MCU foundational characters into Sam's trilogy. With a background in PTSD counseling, it could be interesting to see Sam managing individual counseling therapy sessions with different heroes in his free time. This isn't something we've seen a lot of in the MCU, and it could be interesting to see how Sam interacts with different familiar faces on the big screen. This could provide some lighthearted comedy beats, but could also help ground the MCU as he helps heroes deal with their trauma. This concept would tie in great with the mental health aspects of the Thunderbolts film. Seeing Sam juggle his therapy clients alongside his Captain America's superheroics goals could be very interesting. Actually, I like that idea because we did see a scene like that in Endgame, when Captain America, when Steve Rogers was basically having somewhat, they look like therapy sessions or just discussions with veterans after the snap. These are just a few options that I've toyed around with. Rather than letting them foster, I figured I'd share them with your community. I'd love to hear your thoughts, viewpoints, and critiques on the matter. After all, I am just a humble civics teacher and not a new-aged Hollywood screenwriter. Thanks for creating a safe place for discourse and a celebration of fandom. Best regards, Mr. Prier. Well, Mr. Prier, I like all those ideas. And, it sort of fits in with, look, there's a lot of people that obviously, even on Chris Gore's show, I was on Versus, and we had a pretty spirited debate. Half of us really liked Thunderbolts, half of us didn't, and half of us wanted a more traditional superheroic approach, and others felt that it was really interesting to see superheroes deal with one another and deal with the toll that it takes what they do. And the Thunderbolts they were doing bad things at the behest of a bad person. And I thought the whole dynamic was really interesting. As I've always talked about on the show, I wish the MCU got more into what was the world, how does the world feel after the trauma of the snapping, and what's it like to try and put your life back. They did a little of that in Falcon and Winter Soldier, and I appreciated that. But look, we're going to get the 37th MCU film in Fantastic Four. And then Avengers Doomsday is going to be 38. Spider-Man Brand New Day is going to be 39. And Secret Wars will be the 40th MCU movie. 40. And that's if you don't include the 14 other movies that Kevin Feige produced pre-MCU. So since 2000, you'll be looking at 50 or 64 Marvel movies. That's a lot. And unless you figure out ways to change up the storytelling or at least come at your characters from different directions, your franchise is going to get very boring very quickly. So I think these are great. These are great suggestions. I mean, I really like them. Again, the question is, how exciting are they going to be for audiences? And that's up to the storytellers, obviously. I have a quick letter from Major Chai Chai. She says, "Hello, Robert. I've watched your Robservations about Andor as well as other YouTube channels praising the series, or at least the latest episodes. Your excitement for the show has me curious enough to want to see it. However, after the disaster that was Kenobi, actually after Kenobi's third episode, my family and I had it with Disney Star Wars. We gave up and ended our subscription to Disney+. So for me, it's not enough to ask if Andor is worth seeing. Is it worth the time and money to reestablish my subscription? One hit among many misses does not seem to justify it. While pondering this decision, it made me wonder how Andor is doing in terms of ratings. It's the best Disney Star Wars, but is it attracting an audience? Is viewership increasing with each episode? Will Disney learn from the success of Andor Season 2 and adjust course in its creative leadership? I look forward to your insight. And that comes to us from Major Chai Chai. Well, Major, for you in particular, I would say, look, Andor it's 4 rounds of 3 episodes. And I would say the first 3 start slow, and you might be like, but after you get the next 9 episodes are incredible. And now it's been really interesting, and I really want to get into this. I don't want to get into I don't know how the ratings are doing. I've seen various reports that it is doing well. Obviously, there's a lot of argument in fandom, which I want to get to in a minute, and I will. I just like to read a couple of more, actually just one more letter right now, and then I'll get into the task at hand. And let me see. It's right here. This one comes to us from Damo. Hi, Rob. I have to admit, hearing you read my email out on your show recently made my 44-year-old heart jump with childish joy. And yet again, watching your show, taking in your points surrounding Andor and the mention of modern Trek, got me thinking of yet another key factor to storytelling that has been around since pen first met paper and authors started to write stories, plays, and novels. Morality. Our morals define us, and we get them usually from our family units, but also from what we see, hear, watch, and read. And morality, I believe, is something that has driven great storytelling for years and years, specifically shows like Star Trek. Morality is woven into every episode. Indeed, they are morality plays, but it is not driven home with the metaphorical sledgehammer or finger-wagging that modern storytelling favors. In those shows, bad things happened, and the good guys didn't always win. Tough decisions had to be made, but the moral center of the characters stayed true, and if it ever changed, it was a big deal, sometimes warranting entire episodes to explore. Original Trek had it, TNG had it, the movies had it. Consider Kirk's attitude toward the Klingons in Star Trek VI, let them die. Or Picard in First Contact, poor Ensign Lynch. Out of modern Trek, I think only Picard Season 3 had anything interesting to say about our moral choices. But the morals were clear, concise, and universal to us all. Not so in recent years. Now, I'm not suggesting that the current generations of writers and creators don't have morals, far from it. But I do believe the writers of modern Trek and Star Wars, specifically The Acolyte, have rather confused morals. Morals which are not universal but personal, and as such appeal not to the many but to the few, or the one. How can audiences watch, let alone enjoy, current Star Trek or Star Wars when it challenges what we believe to be right within our core being? That doesn't mean the bad guys can't win. It doesn't mean good guys can't die. But when those things happen, we are shocked, saddened, and horrified. In modern Trek and Star Wars, we seem to be invited to cheer and accept it. Hey, the Star Trek short take, the Discovery short take with the Tribbles, is the single most offensive Star Trek story ever. And it glorified the death of a white man who was portrayed to be an idiot at the hands of a female. I can't believe it was made, much less aired. And it was truly shocking. Between that and Section 31, to see how far Star Trek has fallen is incredibly sad indeed. How can we believe the Jedi are evil in The Acolyte when, to my eyes, they didn't do anything wrong? Yet the writers adamantly believe they did. The same thing is happening to Doctor Who. The universality of morals is no longer present. It's no wonder audiences are leaving in droves. Cassian Andor and other members of the Rebel Alliance have to do some terrible things in the name of freedom. Things that compromise their morals. Things that make the characters and the audience question how far they are willing to go in the pursuit of freedom. But that's what makes the story compelling and complex. And the idea of morality isn't just thrown away when the writers feel like it. Let's hope at some point in the near future we can all be on the same page again. All the best, Damo. A good letter, and one I pretty much agree with. What do you guys think? How do you guys feel about morality? One of the interesting things about morality is I've often heard a lot people say, well, if you're not a believer in religion, for instance, how is there any morality unless you believe in God? And I can understand that point of view. But as someone I consider myself both a civilizationist and a universalist. And if you think about it, human beings are right now, we don't know of any other, unless that, orb in the Brazilian jungle turns out to truly be something we can definitively say is, hey, there's an alien artifact, and we've researched it. It truly is. It's aliens. But let's just say we're the only sentient beings in our neck of the woods. We are the only beings then that are aware of and can observe the universe, the entire infinitude of creation. I got a picture of the shirt I was wearing yesterday from the John Campea show saying "not flat," and somebody wrote, "Rob, I'm very disappointed with you wearing your not flat shirt because everyone knows the Earth is a flat plane and space is fake." Well, that's tough when that kind of thing happens, and I second guess my chances or my choices in life. But if maybe it's our lot in life, and the purpose behind our existence is to recognize the universe itself exists. We are sort of, maybe all humanity is the book of destiny, if you're a Sandman fan, if you can be one anymore, where our purpose is to observe the universe and recognize its existence. Maybe that's it. And if that's the case, then, and I've often said that each human being on planet Earth is a miracle. The fact that we exist at all, if you go back, hey, that's one of my favorite things in Watchmen, when Dr. Manhattan decides that the thermodynamic miracle of life, that each human life is miraculous, and that's why he decides to return from Mars to save us. I've always thought that's true. And I would think then that it's not only our job to recognize the wonder of creation, but it's also our job to recognize the wonder and miraculousness of one another. Isn't that something that, outside of any religious principle, that's why it's in everyone's best interests. It's, in a way, our universal lot in life to watch out for each other, because each one of us is a miraculous event that is worth nurturing and preserving the same way you would nurture and preserve a garden. Except the garden is the human race. That's kind of how I think about it. I don't know if that's too hippy-dippy for some people, but that's kind of the way I think about things. And maybe that's why I like storytelling so much. Because storytelling, the most truthful of stories, and like I said, the best fiction is also the most truthful. Because even though the story's made up, the human truths contained in the best fiction are worth sharing, and they are truthful. They're just packaged in a way that it's also entertaining because we can recognize those human truths. And maybe, literally, what is a story, but it's a way to examine and reflect upon the universe that we live in. And our experience moving through that universe is where stories come from. And isn't that enough? I would say that reason alone is what keeps me going every day, as somebody who's both a consumer and hopefully a storyteller in the work that I've done. I wish I have done much more work in my life in that realm, but I've, step up TrueNoir.co. Get my audio drama right now. That's my latest directorial work, which, I was sitting in this room, sitting right here for 5 months, putting that thing together in my solitude. But anyway, I think that that's my Louis Armstrong, by the way. Would you like me to do the entirety of All the Time that we have all the time in the world? I won't. But that's what storytelling to me is all about. And, somebody took me to task. Somebody left a comment on I was talking about storytelling, and I read a little bit about how stories, the way they work, especially in the brain, when you read, how much of your brain is activated by reading, and how those reading studies make it very apparent that the more you bring in with you, the more general knowledge you have when you read a story, the more it will resonate with you. And I was saying that I think that's true, like fandom, as it was pointed out to me, and I brought it up on the show, we were the smartest people in the room. Because fans, by definition, especially when I was growing up, if you were a fan of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, reading was a huge component of that fandom. And I was explaining how the movies, I brought up, all these movies that were pre-Star Wars, and all the movies I brought up were based on books. And a lot of the people that wrote those movies either wrote the screenplays or wrote the books themselves that they might have written the screenplay for. They also wrote episodes of The Twilight Zone, and they wrote episodes of Star Trek. And so these people were real writers. And their literary work spurned people to go make, what's the word I'm looking for? Made people go out and make the movie version. And fandom, a big part of fandom, especially when I was a kid, was literary. Because the best science fiction stories, we didn't have the technology to adapt them yet. Not effectively. I mean, as much as I do enjoy David Lynch's 1984 Dune, look at the difference between the way the planet Arrakis is depicted in Lynch's Dune, in the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries Dune, and what Denis Villeneuve did. And you can see why literary science fiction was not caught. It was not mined as much as it could have been mined by Hollywood because it was so difficult to pull off. And it was Star Wars that showed, for probably the very first time, what you could actually do on camera, what you could do in a movie to show what a sci-fi world could look like. And I don't think that before that, I mean, if you think about truly alien worlds, like I love me some Mario Bava Planet of the Vampires. Mario Bava's Planet of the Vampires has a really interesting depiction of an alien world. So does Forbidden Planet. Altair. Welcome to Altair 4, gentlemen, and yes, of course, it's matte paintings and it's large backdrops, but it was believable for the time. And there's a reason that Hollywood didn't do that much with science fiction worlds. And when they did pull it off, I mean, it was really interesting how the Forbidden Zone was depicted in the beginning of 1968's Planet of the Apes. But Star Wars really broke the glass ceiling on how far you could go on science fiction. That and Alien, I remember right after Star Wars landing on LV-426, I mean, the depiction of that alien environment was brilliant. And the alien derelict, truly, to this day, the image of the astronauts going in, penetrating the alien derelict are incredible. Incredible images, indelible images from science fiction cinema that in my mind have yet to be beat. And, Prometheus, for all of its faults, one of the most beautiful looking science fiction films ever made. My God, every effect shot in that movie is absolutely flawless. Too bad the storyline isn't, but, you can't have everything. But so I don't blame fandom. It was pointed out that somebody explained to me or thought I was fan blaming. No, I just expect we're supposed to be the best. We fans are supposed to be the most educated, the most highly educated about the things that we love. But we also, and I don't just mean you don't memorize trivia about Star Wars. You have to understand the kinds of stories that are being told and what it is about these stories that what work. And look, I'm of all power and all credit to Dave Filoni. But I think that Star Wars has been taken over since the prequel trilogy by an animated sensibility. And what I mean by that is animation, by definition, is different than live action. And I've often said to people, I don't think like an animator. Like my friend Kevin Rubio, who's a huge Star Wars fan, who wrote the Tag and Bink comics that Marvel republished, which in themselves are a riff on Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And if you have to know what that is to understand what they're doing, and very, very clever comics. But only somebody that understood all of those things could have written Tag and Bink. And so, and Kevin, his thought process, I work with him as an editor at Kids WB, and we would do these promos, and I could never come up with like the humorous things that he could come up with. He had the soul of an animator. Tim Burton does too. And I mean, I couldn't even compete. I couldn't even think the way his mind worked. And it was always a joy to pull off his gags back in the day. It was so much fun to work with somebody like that. But I do think that sensibility has permeated Star Wars for the better part of the last 25 years. And I think it's problematic. I think that the original Star Wars, as much as George Lucas now says he was trying to make it for kids, again, he might have thought that, and if he had had his way, I don't know if the original Star Wars would have been as successful. But what made Star Wars were the adults in the room. It took the adults in the room, and I'm not saying George Lucas wasn't one of them, but it was all of his collaborators that made sure that we got a film that touched the childlike sense of wonder in all of us. It's never gone away. It just lies dormant until you see it. But now Tony Gilroy comes along with Andor seasons 1 and 2, and he's given us the Star Wars concept, and he grew it up for us. That is not something for kids. Andor is for us kids that saw Star Wars when we were kids, and now we've grown up and now we're adults and we're living in the real world, and he's made Star Wars relevant to us as adults. And that is something that's pretty shocking and wonderful. And the great thing about, even if you are like that curmudgeonly critic that I showed in that Siskel and Ebert segment a few episodes back, even he would be hard-pressed not to watch Star Wars Andor and be like, oh, okay. And I've got a lot of people coming after me going, well, Rob, it's not really Star Wars, which I think is sort of interesting, because Star Wars, who's to say what Star Wars is? Well, I'll tell you who's to say what Star Wars is. Charlie Jane Anders. Charlie Jane Anders, she's a science fiction writer that I used to see and speak with at when WonderCon was at the Moscone, or it was at the Moscone Center in San Francisco. And my friend Ashley Edward Miller introduced me to her. And in the intervening time when we first met, she's become quite a noted science fiction writer herself, and written some wonderful books and short stories. And I found an article that she had written, and I thought I would share it. It comes to us from Reactor, and this was published on February 8th, 2023. And I just thought I'd get into it. And again, this is by Charlie Jane Anders, and I would highly recommend her work. I think she has a new book out, too, if memory serves. What the original Star Wars trilogy teaches us about storytelling. I think one decent litmus test for any story is it about what it's about? This may sound kind of silly. How can a story not be about what it's about? Oops, sorry about that. Except, I think this happens fairly often to some extent. It's one of my pet peeves, and it's something I think about a lot in my own work. I spent years learning how to make my stories be about what they're about, and this is still something that I struggle with. Here's what I mean. A lot of stories neglect their crux or their core issue, getting distracted by shiny objects of fun digressions. I'm not just talking about stakes or plot stuff generally. I'm talking about the heart of the story, the thing that we keep coming back to and obsessing about, the emotional core. This could be the central conflict, if it's an especially conflict-driven story, but it could also be just a main thematic concern, or a relationship that everything revolves around, or a community that's at the heart of things. I usually feel like the more you can stay in touch with whatever that thing is, the stronger the story is. To better explain what I mean, though, let's pick on a famous example of a story that isn't about what it's about. The original Star Wars trilogy. Feel free to disagree, but I think the crux of the original trilogy is whether Luke Skywalker will go down the same way as his father. Anakin Skywalker was a young Jedi with tons of power and potential, but he fell to the dark side and became Darth Vader. When Luke shows up, everyone is worried he's going to swerve down the same path. It's the closest thing to a thematic through line these movies have. And it's what the climax of Return of the Jedi is mostly about. The Emperor finally meets Luke and tries to turn him, only to have Luke turn Darth Vader back to the light side instead. But of course, these movies aren't at all about whether Luke will fall to the dark side, especially the first one. The dark side is only mentioned once in A New Hope, when Obi-Wan mentions in passing that Vader was seduced by it. The question of whether Luke is going to repeat his father's mistake is crucial to the ending of Return of the Jedi, as I mentioned above, but it's only discussed in one scene in Return of the Jedi before that, where Luke returns to Dagobah and finds Yoda on his deathbed. Only in The Empire Strikes Back is the danger of Luke falling to the dark side made into a real issue, especially when Luke rushes to confront Vader before he's ready. And Vader's attempt to sway Luke to his side in Empire is a darn sight more effective than the Emperor's similar attempt in Return of the Jedi. Obviously, part of the issue is that George Lucas didn't know that Darth Vader was Luke's father when he made A New Hope. He didn't even know that the movie he was making was called A New Hope. But also, to do justice to the question of whether Luke will embrace the dark side, these movies would have to get, well, dark. We'd need to see a lot more of Luke being tempted by darkness and rage, probably more than the brief flirtations we witness in Empire and Return of the Jedi, maybe similar to what we saw with Anakin in the Clone Wars animated series or Quinlan Vos in some of the Dark Horse comics. You'd have to build a whole arc in which Luke gains confidence in his Jedi skills, but he keeps being tempted to take shortcuts or lash out, and we'd need to see the danger grow in tandem with his power. That would be a very different trilogy than the one we got, to say the least. Let's address the bantha in the room. It's probably true that Star Wars wouldn't have been nearly as popular if it had come closer to telling the story of Luke being tempted by the dark side. It's probably one reason why Empire Strikes Back, though beloved and critically acclaimed, was the least successful at the box office of those three original films. A lot of the appeal of Star Wars originally was that it was a fun ride, featuring pew-pew-pew space battles and lovable characters. This is what gave rise to the four-quadrant blockbuster as we know it today. And I honestly love the goofy fun of it all. It's what I fell in love with as a kid. So I'm not giving advice on how to create something popular or wildly beloved here. Rather, I'm expressing an aesthetic preference. So, how do you make your story about what it is about? Let's start by acknowledging that a story can be about more than one thing, and there's nothing wrong with an episodic structure or travelogue or whatever. A story can deal with a whole cluster of ideas. But when I'm writing a story, and especially when I'm revising, I look at a couple of things. 1. What are the characters asking themselves about each other? What are the problems or philosophical issues that they worry about and debate and fuss over? Put another way, I think a really good scene is worth its weight in gold. And when I write a scene where the characters are talking about something and they seem really alive and present, and I can feel their personalities shining through, I think to myself, I should find ways to get them to talk about that thing more, whatever it was. It's obviously something that cuts close to the bone for these people. 2, what does the ending come down to? If in the final moments of the book came down to an omelet-making contest in which the hero proves they can make the best omelet in the world, then I probably need to see the hero practicing making omelets before this. But I might also want to make the hero... I also might want the hero to worry about whether they're ever going to be a good enough omelet chef, and what exactly is the nature of a perfect omelet. Do we judge omelets by cohesion, shape, fluffiness, some other criterion? Is there any such thing as a platonic ideal of a perfect omelet? Etc., etc. Like I said before, earlier in my career, I wrote many stories and a few novels that weren't really about what they were about. So this is something I think about quite a lot. I don't think this is a question of writing skill exactly, so much as paying attention to what's important in the story so you can strengthen that. Of course, every story is different, and there are no rules, so take this with the usual heap of salt. Well, I thought that definitely worth sharing, especially when it comes to Star Wars, because there's been a lot of discussion and question about what exactly is a Star Wars story. I think anybody who is a connoisseur of stories, and I would assume most of the people watching this show right now are, that's what I mostly bang on about and what I spend a lot of my days thinking about, are storytelling structure, how does storytelling work, why doesn't it work? And I think one of the interesting things about Andor is that it knows exactly what it's about, and that is, how does a rebellion begin? And in order to delve into something like that, you have to first give us a great depiction of what are they rebelling against. And one of the things in Star Wars, I think that everybody points to and says, well, Rob, this is a fairy tale. This is just a fairy tale. And we have bad guys to the point where, I mean, yeah, the stormtroopers dressed in white, and we do see great Imperials dressing white, and they make white. Boy, they cut a fine. I love what they look like in those white suits. Krennic is one well-dressed motherfucker, let me tell you. Everybody was in white. Dedra, they all were. But the idea was, in my mind, okay, to wonder what this empire is and how it rose to power and how does it work every day. Because in Star Wars, we meet these Imperial officers. We see the hierarchy of the Imperial officers. So while we're following our heroes, it is the Empire that they're rebelling against. And it's not like Luke and Han versus the Empire. It's the rebellion. You know of the rebellion against the Empire? Luke's friend Biggs jumped ship to go join the rebellion. I mean, it's the rebellion was there, the Empire was there. So the idea to do a series that delves into those things, well, that's about, in my mind, as Star Wars as you can get. And to ask yourself, okay, now we were following just one of the many stories. There's 10,000 stories in the Naked City. Well, there's 100 million trillion stories in the Star Wars universe. And I think the idea of, look, everyone has always been, the conflict of rebellion against authority is something that works if you're telling the story of a high school student rebelling against a teacher and they eventually find some kind of common ground and they start working together. Jeff Spicoli and Mr. Hond in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I mean, if you really think about it, that's a great story, one of the many vignettes in Fast Times at Ridgemont High that makes it a great movie. Well, I've been thinking about that, Mr. Hand, and if they don't get some rules like pronto, they'll be bogus too. I mean, that was unexpected. And yet you had him rebelling against the authority of Mr. Hand, and then by the end of that show, they see eye to eye. And Mr. Hand actually gets through to Spicoli as a teacher. So that little vignette in Fast, I don't even know why I'm thinking about that. I did not think about that until this. It's weird to do this show live, I'll tell you, the way my synapses fire. But I haven't thought about, I mean, I did think about, maybe because somebody asked about Fast Times at Ridgemont High on Twitter, and I'm like, okay, you know, you guys should get Criterion Disc. But that's just one of the many things, you know, and if you think about it, you could turn the battle between Jeff Spicoli and Mr. Hand into an entire feature film if you wanted to, you know. And I mean, look at great high school stories. Pump Up the Volume, Happy Hard Harry, you know, Christian Slater and Samantha Mathis fighting the man, you know, at this school. Heathers. High school was ripe. Mean Girls fighting rebellions against the Empire. I mean, it's there, man. It's there. You know, Elle Woods in Legally Blonde fighting against the people that would dismiss her intelligence. I mean, that kind of a story can be told in many different milieus. 9 to 5, 3 women fighting against Dabney Coleman, the evil empire of his patriarchal badass self. And these 3 women show him a lesson. And so rebellion against authority is one of the great beginnings of storytelling. And to do it in the Star Wars universe, what a natural thing to do. And then what's great about all storytelling is they have to relate back to the audience in some way. A great story has to have something to hopefully convey to an audience. Otherwise, why tell the story? Which means the audience that you're speaking to, you would hope and you presuppose, and this is the beauty of what Tony Gilroy does. Tony Gilroy is working at a high level, and he expects his audience to work on that level. He asks us to come up to the top of the hill that he's hanging out in and listen to the story that he has to tell us. It's up to us. The question shouldn't be, why isn't Tony Gilroy making this kind of a Star Wars story? The question we should be asking is, I wonder what kind of Star Wars story Tony Gilroy is telling, and I should try and figure it out. Now, I feel that way about every story. Now, when I watch stories like, say, The Acolyte, there were some interesting things going on, but I thought the execution didn't work. I also really didn't think it was very much of a Star Wars story. And it was truly, and I think, the problem is we have now, and we've had a lot of people that are fighting their own rebellions against the world they live in. So they have decided to make their storytelling their own personal rebellion, in a way. So they're injecting their own, look, every author is injecting messaging into their stories. There's nothing wrong with that. But you still have to make the story itself work. And when your agenda, your personal agenda is preeminent or predominant before your characters and stories, you failed as a storyteller. What Tony Gilroy did was he elevated the Star Wars universe on every single level. Because at the heart, he was telling the story that Star Wars was telling, which was not about the Jedi or the Force. That was a part of it, sure. But it was a moment in a battle against the Empire. And it won. I mean, yes, did Luke learn to use the Force? Yes, he did. And remember, the Force is the energy field that surrounds us and binds us. We knew that there was something to do with the Force and religion, because Vader's sad devotion to that ancient religion was something that the Imperial officers commented on. But all of those things that we now associate, like Star Wars has to have all this other stuff that was only vaguely alluded to in the first movie. The first movie was all about war, and it was all about rebellion, and it was all about the rebels saving themselves. Now, that's not to say that part of what is living in the Star Wars universe, if you would like to be like, look at the many religious orders that we have on this planet today. We had a conclave that picked a new pope. Now, I'm not even Catholic, but I'm aware that many people in the universe are, and I thought Conclave was one of the best movies of last year, and I thought it was so fascinating to have seen Conclave, and then I wouldn't have even known that was what it was called. And yet, my knowledge of, again, it's a cursory knowledge brought to me by a fictional movie that was based on a bestseller, but to know what a conclave was to make me more aware and more interested to hear the news story that there was a real conclave that was convened. And suddenly, because of that movie, because it gave me some knowledge that I didn't have before, suddenly I was listening to them talk about it, like, when's the white smoke going to come out? And I even saw a clip of Mel Gibson talking about a conclave that happened. I haven't delved into this, but he said they had put the white smoke out and then they had the black smoke come out. I guess it was a pope in the 50s or something. I don't remember, but I'm like, well, that's interesting. I gotta look into that. I wonder what happened there. I wonder what the story is. I don't know. But Andor was, to me, a story that worked in grand fashion. Now, it was a story, again, the last 3 episodes I thought were pretty close to perfect, with one of the greatest TV montages ever, maybe second only to The Wire, the ending of The Wire seasons, and maybe Friday Night Lights. I teared up. I'm not going to lie. and for a story to affect me emotionally, I would say it worked in grand fashion. Now it's not for everybody, because there's a lot of people that would rather have their Star Wars be much easier to digest, the animated versions of Star Wars. My problem is that Dave Filoni has not convinced me he can translate his animated ideas into live action. I don't think Ahsoka worked as a show at all, as a live action show. And the first season of The Mandalorian was good as a confection. I thought the second season was a little better, but the third season completely went off the rails. Book of Boba Fett went off the rails. The Kenobi series was just an excuse to fan wank by putting like Princess Leia in it and setting up a non-canonical conflict with Vader, which we all had to like put away what we knew was true and what we knew wasn't. And it's too bad, because there's a Kenobi novel they could have adapted that would have been, there didn't have to be Darth Vader. And one of the great things about Andor is it was they took characters that we met in Rogue One. There was no appearance. People are like, well, where's Palpatine? He was mentioned. He was mentioned a lot in these final 3 episodes. He didn't have to be there. Does the President of the United States go to Congress every day? No. How many times does he address Congress during his tenure, his 4-year, 8-year tenure? How many times does he speak before Congress? How many times does he go to Congress? And how many times are people having meetings in the House or the Senate? There's no reason for Palpatine to be there. And the story that Andor told was so thought out. It was so fully fleshed out, and it was so impactful, and it was so well conceived. It was so smart. Look, it might be a lot smarter. It might be too smart for people. And I'm not saying that those people are dumb. They just don't want to have to think as hard or work as hard. And they're not entertained by how dense and how political and how deliberately paced. The problem with Andor is it's the kind of entertainment. It's like the cave on Dagobah. Well, what's in there? Only what you take with you. There's people, and like I've said, when you go to a museum, an art exhibit, if you don't know anything at all about the artist, maybe the art will affect you. But for the most part, if you know nothing about the art that you're going to see, nothing, and you haven't done any kind of cursory reading at all, you're not going to get nearly as much out of it as you would if you just took a half an hour out of your day and read something about the artist that you were going to see. When you walked in there, I guarantee you the experience that you would have looking at those paintings would be more valuable to you. I mentioned the other night that Schreier's book, Inside the Third Reich, it's like 12 or 1,500 pages. I've read that whole book. And I had mentioned it, and somebody sent me a direct message saying that, thanked me for recommending it. They didn't know the book. I guess they didn't know the book existed, and they've been reading it, and they're finding it fascinating. One of the things that I've wanted to in my life, I want to get a first edition of Winston Churchill's 5 volumes of his history of World War II. I've never found a decent, good condition first edition version of those books. But I wasn't putting fandom down. I was just asking, maybe it's a mandate, maybe it's a call to arms, that we're supposed to be the smartest people in the room, especially when it comes to talking about science fiction, fantasy, and horror. We're the ones that are supposed to know the most. We're the ones that are supposed to be able to talk to one another. You could have flame wars and all those kinds of things, but at the end of the day, I just find that the discourse around fandom has become, it's not that it's toxic, it's that it's been infantilized. And that I find that curious, because when we start arguing or talking about, like the letter I got tonight about Captain America, that was a very thoughtful letter from a civics teacher. That to me was the fandom that I grew up with. A civics teacher talking about how does Sam Wilson fit in the world, because that's what was so great about fandom. So there's something else I want to read, another article. And it's from Vindicator, the Cleveland State University's Art and Culture magazine. And it was written on April 24th, 2024. And let me just jump into it right here. The Uncertain State of Star Wars. This was written by Andrew Paduano. It is a period of mystery in the world of the famous Star Wars franchise. Ever since the insidious COVID-19 pandemic, the franchise and film industry declined in activity. Along with years of civil war amongst the fan base due to the controversial sequel trilogy, the culture has taken hits. Many projects have also been announced by Disney, only to be canceled or never heard from again. But a new hope emerges. Famed feature films are catching the attention of general audiences once again. Newly announced Daisy Ridley and Dave Filoni films bring excitement to the future. Fans are left to see if these films will spark or kill the burning flame that is the current state of Star Wars. This is an author's note. I'm sharing these thoughts from my perspective. They may be wrong, and yours may be different. This is not an informational piece. If I wanted to go deep into specific films and shows, I'd need a whole issue. What I've observed. Star Wars is currently in a place of mystery. There's been many Disney Plus shows released recently, but a lot of their storytelling has felt a bit directionless and was met with controversy. There haven't been any feature films since the last film in the Skywalker saga and sequel trilogy, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Even though I did not think the sequels were well-written films, I enjoyed them immensely. Why? I really missed the build-up to when a new Star Wars film came out. They're really just amazing holidays. It's been commonplace for Star Wars projects to be announced only to be canceled and not heard from again. With all the aforementioned things affecting the franchise over the past 5 years or so, I also cannot help but feel like general interest in the franchise has also declined. Don't get me wrong, I still very much appreciate and happily enjoy the new shows. Some have even had moments that I only dreamed would come to the screen. Like they did when the previous sequel films started releasing, except for communities I follow on X, formerly known as Twitter. There's not been many new characters or captivating stories that anyone talks about like they would for shows such as Breaking Bad. Very extreme example, but you get the idea. Shows like The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan Kenobi certainly have many scenes with epic fan moments, but from what I've observed, they were talked about for a little and not much long after. And among the fans, I see a lot of controversy. If you've seen any amount of Star Wars fans online, you know the topic can be just as, if not more, dangerous as politics and religion. To be fair, though, Star Wars fans have been like this for decades. Could the lack of traditional feature films be the main cause, or the disruptions from COVID-19? I don't know, but it's probably a combination of factors. I suspect that it has a lot to do with the writing, the way stories and characters are being told. They're just not strong enough to keep many people interested long term. With millions of movies, TV shows, and short-form content being produced, it's getting harder to stand out and capture people's attention. Many people want rich stories that are well written. Bigger companies like Disney seem to prefer assembly line production. They churn out what sells and use highly efficient but still very cool and innovative productions such as volume sets. I get that they operate on large scales and have tight deadlines, so the storytelling may not be as easy to get right, but maybe they should rethink their processes a bit and focus more on the storytelling and characters. Maybe they already do this. Most people don't know what actually goes on behind the scenes, but it doesn't seem like it. Not all, but many of the new TV shows seem to lack structure. Sometimes there are a lot of filler episodes. Sometimes the main story will not connect to anything or explain the state of the galaxy in a meaningful way. Sometimes, if the story is meant to be smaller scale, it's not contained and rather connected to larger stories. This happened in the Book of Boba Fett, leaving its main storyline about Boba Fett feeling neglected. I hope for stronger writing and characters in the franchise, stories that make logical sense, flow well, and continue to grab people's attention more. Many mid-season episodes of the Book of Boba Fett focus on a completely different story. The episodes barely had any connection. They were really just Mandalorian episodes, and while the show had cool moments, it overall felt somewhat hollow. And Andor, which showcases the kind of quality of character storytelling and world building I'm looking for, barely got any attention. Some other good shows, such as the animated Star Wars Visions and Star Wars The Bad Batch, have not seemed to spark much discussion, except from the most devoted fans. I do have faith in the newly announced Rey movie starring Daisy Ridley and the upcoming movie by Dave Filoni, Chief Creative Officer of Lucasfilm. Both are said to be features, which Star Wars is known for drawing a ton of attention toward in the past. The Filoni movie may tie together many of the stories that were left unfulfilled in the recent TV shows, possibly featuring one villain and a strong event that the story is structured around. That would be, of course, The Mandalorian and Grogu now. Ridley also said in a recent Josh Horowitz interview that she believes the new Rey movie will be a very fun movie and that if she didn't have faith in the story, she wouldn't be doing it. I trust her word on this, and it makes me excited. There have also been amazing moments in the recent shows. We got to see Luke Skywalker being a Jedi again. We got Baby Yoda. We got to see live-action Thrawn and Ahsoka, and it was a damn dream come true. I loved every second of his screen time, especially the entrance scene. However, I did not think he was written well. He was not the tactical genius we knew from the books, at least not yet. I'm not saying Star Wars is doomed or that it should go back to the good old days. Rather, with more thought-out writing, the new Star Wars projects can gain and keep the attention of many more people. They got the spirit, just not the execution. Now, that's a pretty simplistic article, but I do think it's pretty much what most people think. That's why I found it and thought I would read it. And, you know, in my mind, there's a lot of talk about nostalgia. Look, and I think that stories, whether you're reading, when I would read, say, I loved Roald Dahl's books when I was a kid. I loved Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, James and the Giant Peach, Danny the Champion of the World. I really loved Roald Dahl's books, and I loved his writing. But his books were not simplistic. You know, why I liked them is because they were a little edgy, to be honest. All of those books were a little edgy. They were being spirited, you know, the witches. These were not stories that pulled their punches. And, you know, obviously when we read stories that really resonate with us, it's when we read them that also matters. I've always thought that the great stories, people's favorite stories, they're kind of like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. You know, they arrive when they mean to. When you find a story that resonates with you, that's when you were meant to discover it. You know, you were open to it. You, for whatever reason, it found you at the perfect time. You know, it resonated with you. I remember reading Donna Tartt's The Secret History, a book I recommend to everybody. But you know what? I've talked to very few people who've actually read it that I know. But Donna Tartt's The Secret History, it was one of those books that when I read it, you know, it's funny. I had read, it's kind of like the movie Martyrs. And they have nothing to do with each other. But I had been reading about The Secret History. You know, I'd been reading about Donna Tartt and the whole like Bennington crowd, and because I love Jay McInerney, and I've got every one of Bret Easton Ellis's books, and you know, then I started reading about Donna Tartt, and I saw her picture, and I thought, she's kind of hot, you know. What's her book about? And I couldn't figure it out. You know, I was reading about her and what the book was about. I read reviews of the book, and I'm like, I don't get a sense of what this book is. It sounds intriguing to me. And then I opened it up, and I was 3 or 4 pages in, and I'm like, this is a beautifully written book. I was completely hooked. Completely hooked. It is not science fiction. It is not, well, it's not horror. It's got some existential dread in it, I think. But and who would have thought I would have been involved? I would have gotten so involved in a book about a classics professor at a hoity-toity college. But that's what The Secret History is, and I recommend everyone read it. And why that, like, where's David Fincher's adaptation of that? You know, I read once that Gwyneth Paltrow bought the rights. But, you know, I read that book, and I read it at the time that I needed to read it. And as I'm watching Andor, I mean, whatever your political affiliation is, what has been happening since Trump was inaugurated is not exactly politics as usual around the world. And whatever your political affiliation is, there's a lot of abnormal things happening. Sure, and maybe they'll at least the stock market's back up. Maybe you move fast and break things, and in the long run, things will change, and we definitely need change. We need things to happen. We need things to, the status quo might not have been working out. But I would like to hope that the change that we're seeing has the American people in mind rather than the special interests of certain people instead. I mean, that's what I want to see. But I do think that Andor, especially season 2, and when people try and equate it, it's not written necessarily about any one specific thing. It's written about rebellions through history and what the costs that people pay, or what happens to people that get involved in these kinds of rebellions. And I'll tell you one thing. After it was over, I felt, and I'll tell you something else, kudos to Disney Plus, because I listened to the credits, the music going all the way through, and of course, when it goes off, immediately Rogue One goes up. You know, I'm like, oh. I will say this. I think Andor, putting it together with Rogue One, what a satisfying... Look, I still don't like the way Rogue One ties into the original Star Wars. I think it's clumsy. I don't think it particularly works perfectly well. It doesn't make much sense to me. But that's okay. I think Andor and Rogue One work great together. And what I loved about the story was I felt that I was watching a tale that they had carefully constructed, they had thought about, they had written and rewritten and talked about it and crafted it. And I felt for the very first time, I didn't feel this way about Return of the Jedi. I felt this way about Star Wars and Empire. Star Wars, we all know that it was a mess, and it took a lot of people and some Herculean efforts of everybody involved to craft it into the movie that it became. Which, by the way, a lot of movies go through that. So Star Wars became the movie it was supposed to be. It might not have been the movie that George Lucas thought he was making. Certainly The Empire Strikes Back was not quite the movie George Lucas thought he was making, but it also had the same kind of people crafting it and giving us the movie that we got. And both Star Wars and Empire were examples to me, while it's ironic, all the right people were working on the film that understood what was going on and gave us what we got. And it was that frisson that made them what they were. But I do feel that Andor seasons 1 and 2 was a fully realized vision. It was a fully realized entertainment. It was a fully realized story. And to be honest, I can't wait to go back and revisit season 2 again. And now that I can concentrate on the subtle nuances when they brought characters back, and the blaster from season 1 belongs to this guy, and everything that happened, and to see the connections they made. I don't care if it's a Pixar movie, because say you watch something like Toy Story 3. Toy Story 3 is a show, it's a story that kids can certainly watch. But if you're an adult and you've lived more life and you have more to bring with you when you watch Toy Story 3, it's a far richer, much more devastating experience. And the thing is, that's not to say that it's not a movie for kids. But the great stories, they continue on. And I think as you gain more knowledge or more appreciation, great stories only gain in stature. And that's what makes storytelling great. Stories are what give humanity a way to reflect back on ourselves. The same way that, if you go back to morality, the same way that we're here to comment on the universe itself and our place in it. Hopefully we'll survive and move out amongst the stars, if that's in the cards. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? But on that note, let me see what you guys are saying. I just realized I've been blathering on for an hour, and I'm sure people have things they've been talking about. So let's find out what that might be. Or, maybe no one has anything to say. Who knows? I don't necessarily know. So let me look into this. Let's go to the big board and see. Yes, and a lot of people have things to say. Darth Plato says or asks. Wait, let me lead up to that. Played out says, "Hey Rob, a little something, for the effort." the Dalai Lama. That's a Caddyshack reference. Carl Spackler says that. Thank you for that. Played out. Appreciate that. Romy Forever is now a member. We will be having a member chat this weekend at 11 o'clock on Saturday. Latino Slant, Polly from Latino Slant, says, just finished Andor RMB. What a beautiful and brutal entry into Star Wars. My heart is full. I totally agree. But you know what? Rebellions are beautiful and brutal. By the way, how great was it to see our boy Benjamin Bratt playing Bail Organa? I thought he was great. And, he was great. Corey Smith says, after seeing the quality in Andor, what would you suggest as a future project for Star Wars? Well, first of all, I think that the people that are making Star Wars and where is Star Wars going to go, which is definitely part of this conversation, I think you look at Andor and you use that as a baseline to show what kind of storytelling Star Wars is now capable of. And I was watching Amadeus. Amadeus just came out, the theatrical version, in beautiful 4K. And it's wild that Amadeus can be a childish movie at times. It has some puerile jokes, and that's how the character of Tom Hulce expertly portrays Amadeus. But its central theme, the Salieri story, and if you guys have never seen Amadeus, it's one of the best movies ever made. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. But the story of Amadeus is there's this court composer, Salieri, Maestro Salieri, who, through his own hubris, he wanted to become a great composer so he would be recognized, he would get the accolades. He'll tell you that he wanted to honor God, but really he was kind of a narcissist, and he wanted people to look at him, and it was a pick me kind of a thing. And then he encounters Mozart. And for all the hard work and everything that Salieri endured, he still was only an okay composer. And yet Mozart comes along, this young prodigy taught by his father, and Salieri's father could care less about music and pretty much could care less about him. So Salieri did not have a strong father figure, whereas Mozart's father doted on him from the beginning and was part of the reason Mozart became a prodigy at 5 years old. So in the story, Salieri ends up encountering Mozart and decides that this is God's way of punishing Salieri. And Salieri decides to denounce God. And he sees that he thinks Mozart is God's mouthpiece. That Mozart has been given this godlike power that was denied Salieri. And that's what motivates him. And it goes from there. And it's such a powerful story, and it's so entertaining to watch. If you haven't seen Amadeus, the new 4K disc is beautiful. I'm sure it's going to wind up on streaming services. The sound is amazing, the remastered sound. But it's just one of the great movies ever made that comments on creativity. And it made me hark back to this movie. I went to work for this director. I was working on Free Willy, and the first director of it, a guy named Robin Armstrong, quit 6 weeks before production. But I really admired, I think because he got cold feet, and Simon Windsor ended up taking over. And I stayed on the film for a while, and then I went and started working for Robin Armstrong. And I worked for Robin Armstrong, I've said this before, because he made this great movie, this minor league baseball movie called Pastime. And Miramax released it. And in that movie, there's an over-the-hill pitcher named William Russ, who was in Wise Guy, who's in the Buckwheat. And William Russ was going to be supplanted by this young, up-and-coming pitcher that threw fire. And Noble William, who plays the coach, says this line, and the reason I wanted to work with Robin Armstrong was because he's a man that directed this movie that had this line in it, this notion. And Noble William says to William Russ, look, it doesn't matter how good someone else is. It doesn't make you any better or any worse. And that just really resonated with me, because we're always comparing and contrasting ourselves to other people. And Mozart's genius, that Salieri's downfall is that he looked at Mozart and compared and contrasted himself to Mozart, and he was never. It's a terrible thing to do. You're never going to be Mozart. You're not going to be him. You're not going to have his talent, but that doesn't mean that you don't have something to offer. You have to find out what you have to offer. Salieri never knew what he wound up trying to kill himself because of it. That's not a spoiler alert. That happens at the beginning of the movie. But that's why I wanted to work for Robin Armstrong, because I love that in his movie Pastime. I mean, it's over 30 years later, and I'm still thinking about it. But I think what Andor proves is the question was asked, what as Corey Smith is asking, what should be the future of Star Wars? As I was saying, you can tell stories that are for the whole family. Walt Disney certainly did. Walt Disney's greatest live-action achievement, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, was a family-friendly movie that was still about adults. I saw that movie when I was a kid, and I was blown away by it. Because even as a kid, I can enjoy 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I understood what was going on. I understood Captain Nemo's frustration with us, the surface dwellers. It made sense to me, but it was a movie that did not pander to children. You know, whereas George Lucas talks about making movies for children. Walt Disney made movies for children, but he made movies for everybody. He made movies for the whole family, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And if I was going to say, like, what would I try and do with Star Wars? Somewhere between 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Andor. Or somewhere between Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. You know, the problem that I see with modern Star Wars is it's up its own ass. Like I've said, Star Wars is only about itself. Great storytelling is about the audience. You have to tell the audience a story that they can get something from, get something out of it. You have to be talking about human nature. Even if you have a story like Wall-E, robots, you know, and yet it still talks about, it's still the human spirit. And that's the trick. Everyone thinks that, we have to make a movie about the Jedi. Okay, you're going to make a movie about the Jedi, but how are the Jedi like us here on Earth today? How do you relate back to us? Now, I'm not saying the Jedi themselves can be the Jedi, but, you know, storytelling, all stories are about us. They're about human beings on Earth. And you can tell wild stories about alien races and all that, but how do those stories affect and how are they about us? You know, and someone took me to task about in the comment section about, well, I said that Han Solo and Luke were relatable, but Rey wasn't, and they were making the argument that Rey was certainly relatable. Okay, here's the difference. The difference is when we meet Luke, he's a farm boy. He lives on a farm. Do we know what a moisture farm is? No, but we understand that he has to do chores. We understand that he's doing work for his uncle. We understand that he has responsibilities. We understand that he has to go get power converters in Tosche Station to hang out with his friends. We understand he's a great pilot. Why? Because Ben Kenobi tells us. I've heard you become a great, you're not such a bad pilot. I'm not such a bad pilot myself, but it's Ben Kenobi who first says it. So there's all of these things that we as the audience can infer because we know what a farm, we know what it's like to maybe not live on a farm, but we understand what a farm is. If you cut to Rey, when we meet Rey, she's diving into the wreckage of a Star Destroyer. Now, you can say, well, she's a scavenger. There's nothing around Rey in her environment that would lead us to believe that she knows anything at all about anything. There's no indication that she knows how to fly, certainly. Certainly not a ship like the Millennium Falcon. And being a scavenger, how does she know everything about the interior of a Star Destroyer to know what she needs to find, what to get? I mean, Rey is a character that just exists and we just take it on face value that she just does what she does. Now, we, as astute storytellers, consumers of storytelling, are looking to be convinced. And great storytelling does that, when you never question something. When I watched The Force Awakens, I did not believe that Rey could fly the Millennium Falcon like that. I didn't believe it. You know, well, she's adept with the Force. She doesn't know how to fly a ship through the wreckage of a Star Destroyer. She doesn't know how to do that. She's never done it before in her life. I don't care how many times she's been in that ship traveling. I mean, it's like getting into I know how to drive a car, but if I get into a go-kart or I go to a track and I'm going to drive a car 150 miles around a track, it's not easy to do. And I know that because I live in the real world. So unless you convince me that Rey is somebody that has a reason, or you have to convince me through, so I can infer through the unraveling of the story, if you can make me believe that I can believe she can get behind the wheel of the Millennium Falcon and pilot it that way, fine. But with Luke, it's set up. It's set up from the very beginning. And it gives you all this information that you can infer. That's part of great storytelling. And when you're doing cutscene storytelling, as I like to call it, J.J. Abrams, for him, it's everything is a cutscene. You don't have to. And the thing is, people, well, Rob, she's strong in the Force. Look, just because the Force doesn't know how to fly a ship, The Force is an energy field that you can tap into. It doesn't help you stand behind the controls of a spaceship that you've never been in. The Force doesn't, you're not downloading Kung Fu from the Matrix. It's just an energy field you can tap into. If you're strong with the Force, it's great. It doesn't mean you can do your multiplication tables. Just like it doesn't mean you can fly a ship. And this idea that she's strong with the Force, so no, you have to train. Just being strong with the Force doesn't mean anything. If you walk down the street and you're strong with the Force, you can't start levitating Starbucks coffee cups unless you've trained to do that. And you might have to train for years. And when did people just decide, if you watch Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi, even if you're strong with the Force, stuff just doesn't happen. You have to train and train and train and train to figure that out. And it's such a weird thing. Where did people just decide if you're strong with the Force, you can just do shit? That tells me that people have not been consuming stories very well. And I would ask fandom to do better. That's what, anyway. So what I want to see great stories told in the Star Wars universe. I want to see great storytelling like Andor. Does it mean that I want to see stories that Andor tells? Do I want to see more spy rebellion stories? No, I would like to see all different kinds of stories in the Star Wars universe. One of the reasons I'm looking forward to the next Avatar is we've never met Na'vi that have forsaken Iowa, that have decided that Iowa is not their jam. They don't believe in Iowa. They live at the Mount Doom, the volcano people. I call them the Mordor Na'vi. I'm really curious from a storytelling standpoint. I thought all Na'vi worshipped Iowa, and we've seen why they would. Is Pandora, like Solaris, alive? Is there a super intelligence at the center of that planet? Perhaps. There's certainly evidence for it, but I want to know, why do these Na'vi not believe it? And if they don't believe it, what do they believe? I'm curious, and we've seen 8 minutes of it and looks astonishing in, HFR 3D. Looks amazing. So, yeah. Anyway, just a thought. Connor Williams says, I wanted was an excellent Star Wars show. I got that, but what I also got was a gritty and granular examination of authoritarianism and rebellions. Connor, that's exactly right. You got something more than just a Star Wars story. And that's what I want from Star Wars. That's what I want from Star Trek. I want something more. I want something that resonates with me beyond the laser swords. All that's window dressing. That'll take care of itself. What does it mean to be a Jedi Knight? What does it mean? What is your responsibility to the Republic? That was always the interesting thing about, all of the, you talk about a republic. Rome would be the obvious example. And if you want to delve into these things, man, there's so many great histories. Robert Graves, man. I, Claudius. Go get those books. Those books are probably, man, if you want to write some Star Wars, read some Roman history. There's where you go. Go watch I, Claudius. Darth Plato says, Rob, yes or no, is Return of the Jedi canon? It is canon. I wish it wasn't, but it's canon. You can't do anything about it. Thomas Logan says, GL had... Bobby, George Lucas had the rematch between Vader and Obi-Wan in his mind all the way back in 81. That's why it's referenced in Return of the Jedi when Luke meets Vader on Dagobah. Maybe. I mean, again, I don't necessarily think... I think there's been a lot of, especially with Mr. Lucas himself, a lot of retconning. I don't necessarily think that Luke meeting Vader on Dagobah refers to anything other than Vader is a presence that Luke saw kill his mentor. But, that could be. There's been a lot of things that have been said after the fact that I disagree with because they weren't said at the time. And I only know that because I lived through it and I was obsessive about anything to do with Star Wars. Art Diaz became a new member. Thank you, Art. Geo Diaz says, the ending, when they reveal why Bix left, I didn't see it coming. I'm still tearing up. This was the Star Wars we deserved. I'd actually read somebody say that and I was like, I know exactly that's exactly what was going to happen, and I loved it. I thought it was great. I love that ending. Cup of Joe Media says, "Hey Rob, coming back to watch this after I finish Andor, I just wanted to put out a reminder to everyone that Kingdom of Heaven's 4K director's cut is in theaters for one night tonight." I guess that would be, is that true? May 13th? That is, I love that. I didn't realize that was tonight. I definitely would like to go see that. And Wiley Todd sends in a tip, and $10 tip, and says, "Hi Rob, a couple of years back we did an interview about James Bond. Nice to see you. I was wondering, what are some of your favorite movie needle drop or licensed soundtracks?" Favorite movie needle drops. Are you talking about source cues? You're talking about licensed music for movies like Quentin Tarantino? Oh, that is These Boots Are Made for Walking in Full Metal Jacket has to be one of them. And I love that. And, of course, Singing in the Rain in A Clockwork Orange has to be one of them. In Under Siege, Jimi Hendrix, the scene when they cut to the battleship in the water, and it's so great the way that I don't even, it's so embarrassing. I just brought up Under Siege. I mean, there's so many great needle drops in movies. The use of Love Missile F-111 in Ferris Bueller's Day Off is a good one. Tiny Dancer in Almost Famous is great. But there's so many good. I mean, I have to sit down. You're putting me on the spot. These are just the things that came off the top of my head. But those are some. I don't know what that says about me though. Yeah, I love me a great needle drop. Give me a great needle drop. I love them. But anyway, yeah, I guess I have this whole article I wanted to read on civilization and culture, but it's so long that I don't think I'm going to read it. I won't read it. But yeah, I just think that Andor, it gave us something special. It gave us something that was so well crafted and well thought out. It might not be for everybody, which I can understand. And I'm not going to say, well, you're depriving yourself. There are people that just don't like certain kinds of things, and I get that. And the pacing and the story that's being told is not your standard Star Wars fare. And maybe if time goes by and you revisit it, maybe you'll enjoy it. I don't know, but I thought that it certainly ended in grand fashion, and it packed a wallop, and I thoroughly enjoyed every moment of it. And I'm so happy that we live in a world that we got a Star Wars project like this from people, that Disney got it made, that somebody like Kathleen Kennedy allowed it to be greenlit and allowed Tony Gilroy to bring it to life. And look, I would like to see filmmakers like Tony Gilroy take a crack at Star Wars and to not have to be constrained by the animated sensibility that has dominated Star Wars, I think, for too long. I like Dave Filoni's animation work quite a bit. I don't think it's been a good fit for live action, unfortunately. And I don't like. I think we've been getting a bunch of lackluster storylines by creators that don't have the ability to do what Tony Gilroy did. And I would like to see Star Wars elevated. We have, I mean, look, does that mean that they're not going to make a great Star Wars Starfighter movie? I would see something like that, but to be honest, I don't have much interest. I really don't. What about a Starfighter movie is interesting to me? Like, what about, like, I get it. like there were the X-Wing Squadron books, and there was good. Those books were good, and I can see where they're coming from. But you know, a Starfighter movie seems a little generic to me. But you know, maybe they have a great idea. I could be wrong. But the thing about Andor is that it was about Star Wars, and it was about so much more. And great stories are about so much more. They're much greater than the sum of their parts. And I would like to see more of that, in whatever form that takes. And on that note, I'm going to end this show. This has been a great show. I want to thank everybody for coming here. I want to thank everyone for generously supporting this channel via super chats and tips. I want to thank you all for being members. We will have a member chat this week. And Gio Diaz says, did I miss it? Did they wrap up Andor's sister? Well, you're going to have to find out on your own. I don't want to say anything. But yeah. We'll talk about that later. So, definitely. But we'll see. And I want to thank my moderating staff. Darth Plato is here moderating. Thanks, Darth Plato. I appreciate that. Tom Jr. Jackson, I believe, is on vacation. He's traveling, so that's pretty cool. And for those who've been asking, yes, my actual real birthday is this Thursday, and I believe I will be doing a stream. So there you go. And on that note, I would say, don't give in to hate. It leads to the dark side. And watch Andor Season 2. Watch those last 3 episodes. Woo, boy. That was some great stuff. Wow. Unexpected and beautifully made. So I'll see you guys later. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, well, have a better night.